Hi. So today I'm joined by Marcela Widrig. Is that how you pronounce your
Yeah.
surname? Beautiful. I'm really delighted to be interviewing Marcela because I've done quite a bit of work with her personally. I've been to a couple of her amazing workshops and had some incredible bodywork sessions. And what I love about Marcela is just this intelligence about the body and embodiment practices that is just delightful. And so I'm really inspired to interview her today and to delve a bit deeper into some of these topics. So welcome, Marcela.
Thank you.
Beautiful. I'd really love to hear a little bit of background as to your journey and how you got into what you're doing, particularly around your private sessions, the work you do in your bodywork sessions, and also the embodiment practices that you teach in your workshops, because they're amazing.
Thanks. Um, I was living in Spain, and this was about back, gosh, like almost 25 years ago. And I was doing a very typical job, like marketing, sales, go to work every day, very structured. And a friend of mine was studying this body work. And so I would show up on her doorstep every Friday night really, really exhausted from the week because in honesty, when I look back on that now, I have no idea what to do with my emotions, none whatsoever. My mechanism was to just shove them down and endure. And then at a certain point, then I would just explode or fall into a heap and collapse. And so that was like the little door opening. And it just, I started to pursue it personally and do workshops. And then the recognition 20 plus years ago that these patterns of behavior were something that I could unlearn. And that when I did that, these parts of myself that in some ways I was always longing for or I knew were there, but I didn't know how to reach them, I could get there through my body. And
Mm.
and believe me when I say I tried to do it with my mind. And there's no way that I can to this day, even less so, right? And so that just started the journey. I started to train in a methodology that I'm no longer affiliated with, but it was really, really excellent training in some respects called the Grinberg method. And I actively trained with them for 18 years, I think. And when I say actively, I mean 2, 3, 4 times a year, going back and forth from California to Europe, where they were based. And I immediately started my own practice of the body work. And it's changed the way that I work today, even compared to a few years ago when I was still in this methodology, has changed in the sense that I really trust the people that I'm working with. Whereas before I was kind of applying a method. And
Would you say that's because you're trusting their body's intuition? Is that what that comes from, or?
yeah, I guess that's how I could say it. I think I used to walk in the room with some sort of an agenda because that was kind of how it was transmitted down to me, And so that happens, right? With a teacher, it sort of I think you and I talked about this before, like it sort of
Yeah.
filters through you. And while I would say that the knowledge of working with the body and patterns of behavior and how to touch a body, that was a wonderful basis that it gave me. But when
Mm.
I started to just take off the agenda completely and meet a person and just sort of see like, oh, okay, well, what's their body gonna tell my hands? And the rest of me too, because it's not just like my hands are kind of the direct, meeting point, and it has been like the last couple of years since following it more in this way has been the richest time of working with people in the whole 20 years of having done this kind of work.
Wow. And it's really amazing when you actually, as a receiver, what I noticed in the sessions I had with you is that I have a big awareness of emotions being stored in the body. It's a big part of my work too. But really on a very profound level, me digging into something that was my spleen, and just having all these kind of memories and just recognitions of, oh, that's where that negative thought pattern's stored. That's
Yeah,
where I've been holding this.
yeah.
It's incredible. It's
It really,
incredible.
I feel
Yeah,
like it's really magical to me. And you can't get there through your head.
absolutely.
Because how would you know, right? That like I might be touching a point that's your spleen, and that suddenly these memories come up, and that somehow it's not only the memories, but it's the energy that opens up.
Yeah,
That,
it's the patterning that's been contracted around it, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. Wow.
I mean, one thing that I know a lot of people ask me about in the work is like, well, what do you do with those negative emotions, right?
Yeah.
And I am pretty thankful for my training in that respect, because it was never presented to me as negative emotion.
Mm,
Like never negative or positive. It was just pattern or an undoing of a pattern,
mm,
right? So that if I'm managing to undo in my body as I'm working with you, that's undoing, there's this very much a give and take.
yeah.
So, and this goes for anything. And I think that in like probably in the world of the spiritual realm, you know, you talk more about the shadow side.
Hmm.
And people have addressed it to me like that, like, oh, you know, you'll touch those shadow side emotions. And really I am constantly just looking at it as energy, and then that's stuck
Yeah.
and even subtle and you know, kind of pleasurable, and sometimes it can be an incredible rush that almost feels like too much for the person or for their memory.
Yeah.
So the dance becomes how do we together kind of work to see if we can tap into that and encourage it through the body, so that you get it back, so it's no longer stuck in the memory and
Yeah.
in the pattern. It's you in a much
Absolutely.
fluid way.
That's it. Yeah, from what I remember, it's just like suddenly this rush of life force. It's like reclaiming this energy that's been frozen and trapped and just
Yeah,
contracted around these patterns. It's incredible.
yeah.
Yeah. And what would you, can you tell us a bit more about the practice that you do in your workshops, the embodiment practices? Because that works on a similar way of
Yeah,
allowing people to find how to release their own patterns that are stuck. Would you say that's
yeah.
part of it?
That's, and I would say that even in the sessions, like one of my biggest aims is that somebody walks out with the like almost tools, not almost tools, with actual tools of embodiment, and also just trust that, oh yeah, I have this ability to do this. Because otherwise then you're just reliant on somebody else all the time, you know, and that doesn't feel good for any of us. So in the workshops, usually the way that I layer them is that a good portion of the beginning is just becoming a body, just like becoming your skin, your muscles, your bones, your organs, your fluidity, and also feeling your body in space, right? So like when you're moving, having that awareness of your three dimensionality in space. So I use a lot of movement for that. And then inevitably, given the context, whatever the subject is of the workshop, I'll use what the experience was in the body as we're doing these. You know, I'm structuring the movement training around the subject of the workshop. And so starting to use it and starting to through that learn, people start to learn what their pattern or patterns are around the subject. So it's kind of addressing it from both levels, like encouraging energy in the body so that you can actually feel these repetitions, And then learning how do the repetitions land in me. And if I have, if I contract my stomach and harden my chest and pull my neck back, how is that relating to the subject of the workshop? What beliefs are involved in it? What is and isn't allowed? It's all contained in those moments. So there's, at that point, once a workshop participant has that kind of awareness, you can start to move in a more exaggerated way as this limited expression of yourself. So if it's in the shifting shame workshop, you would move with, I'm not good enough, right? And so how does that feel in the body? Where do you hold that? And learning to move into it. And this is the tricky part. Let me see if I can explain it well. If you really commit to it and you fully move into it, which means if I am feeling not good enough, I might actually, my outward expression might be anger, right? Like I'm insulted. Whereas underneath, I might not feel good enough. And so if I can find, how do I hold this insult in my body? And I really commit. I'm going to commit to being absolutely insulted and feel how my body moves. So I'm investing more and more and more energy into it. At a certain point, the dam starts to break and open up. And that energy you've been investing in a very specific way over and over and over through these patterns collects, and then it starts to actually move into other areas of the body. And that's when the shift happens, right? That's when the magic happens. That's when all of a sudden you go, oh, hey, I'm more than this behavior. And the energy that was locked down into not being good enough or not feeling lovable or valuable, that actually starts to open up. And you heal and your body heals, and life, how you interact with life just naturally changes, as opposed to you having to think about how to be different.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's amazing from being in your workshop, seeing how much can shift in one day. It really is. And it's amazing how many areas of our bodies, even if we've done lots of yoga practices and dance practices and all the other stuff that many of us do, that we find areas that we just don't have that much of awareness of, like even in the warm-ups, bringing awareness into maybe our elbows or our ankles or whatever it is, or particularly the spine, I know is a big one that you get us to work with. And it's just like bringing the consciousness there is such an important part of the tuning into the body's intelligence. It's huge. Yeah. Yeah.
One thing that I've learned over the last year of really, on this high volume of teaching I've been doing, is that when I start a workshop, and you might have had this experience, I'm teaching a different technique of movement, I'm teaching an approach that a lot of the women who come are, many of them, probably about 50%, love movement. And I know Melbourne for sure, and Byron for sure. Like, you guys are movers, and you're fluid, and you go. There's all kinds of offerings, so that it can feel like, wait a minute, you mean you just want me to move my hips, or you just want me to move my shoulders, and you want me to like stop on the beat and like, how restrictive, right?
I just want to flow. Yeah.
Like, woo, woo.
Yeah.
The thing is that I'm all for that, right? But there's something really powerful, and I finally figured out how to articulate it. That if you take an area of the body and you really drop into it and you just move from that area and you start to find just in that, what are my normal patterns of movement, say in my hips, right? Oh, I always move like this. As you start to find different options, it's a lot easier to do that when you're focusing on an area than when you're trying to do the whole body all at the same time. So it's articulating the different areas that might relate more to each theme of the workshop, and then putting them back together so that you are much more integrated at that point for addressing whatever the subject is, right? If you don't have access to the strength and the muscles in your legs, it's very difficult to stand your ground when you want to set a boundary.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And flow doesn't help you get there,
Absolutely.
usually, right?
Yeah.
So I don't want to use like black and white, but usually if you're just trying to be flowy all the time, that's one rhythm. And there are so many different rhythms and ways to move that if through this movement approach, you'll start to access it. And then it just becomes options in your body.
Absolutely. I think this is where the breaking of the patterns takes place, isn't it? Yeah. We put so much energy into these resistances and these things that we hold in our body, and it takes much more energy to actually hold on to those than it does to let it go. And it's just what we've become, what we've trained ourselves to do.
Exactly.
It's really
but
amazing.
You know, there was a reason that we trained ourselves to do that.
Yeah.
Right? Like if we could take one pattern and we could trace it back through simply the history of our known life to each moment where we fortified it until we finally got back to the crux of it, usually, if not always, but I don't know because I can't make that big of a statement, but like usually there was a point where whatever we were feeling as a child was just too big.
Yeah. And the body was just protecting, that was our protection mechanism.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So whether it was humiliation or abandonment or neglect or terror or the rage of another in your environment, whatever it was, as a little child, we don't have like we feel it all, right? And so there had to be moments of pulling it in, lessening it, and that's how we sustained ourselves.
Absolutely.
Just doesn't work today.
I'd love to hear from you a bit more because you have a couple of key workshops that you're going to be touring around the world with again. Yay! So one of them is shifting shame and also embodying boundaries as well. So they're the two that I've attended. So I'd love to hear a bit more about these, in particular, these themes and why you chose these and just the results that you see in the workshops.
Oh man, those results have been really, I don't really have the words for it because it moves me so much when I see what the women are willing to go through and experience. And so I'll start from the back and then I'll work my way back around to what you were asking. I taught this workshop in San Francisco a week and a half ago, and we were in the crux of it. Like it's a day and a half, and the end of the second day is usually like we've gone through the history, we've gone through the deepest old conclusion that you might be holding in your body. You know, we've gone through some stuff. And this one woman said to me afterwards, she was so bright and so happy at the end of it. And she was really like, how, Marcela, could there be so much joy in the room? And, like I have a long explanation for that, but in truth, it's just this magic that I get to watch every time and be a part of. It's not just that, right? Like as women, when we finally start to undo that deep, deep old belief, however we hold it in our minds, but undoing it in our bodies, our who we are gets to come out. Our essence and to overuse a word, but it's like I don't have another word for it. It's who we are gets to come out and just be.
Absolutely. It's like our life force, our Shakti. It's like, here I am. Yeah.
What a relief.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I've been waiting for you to come in there for a while. So the shifting shame, the way that I got into it was through a pretty intense personal process that I took myself on. Probably a lot like what you've done, really. I reached a point where I had all the right parts in place in my life in Los Angeles. I had a really good practice. I had good friends. It's an interesting city. There's always something happening. So your intellect can be stimulated as well as your, heart. To a degree, there's also the mind-numbing parts of Los Angeles, and I was also I started to go through menopause, and that was not as obvious to me as it should have been in some ways if I look at it now. And then a pretty crucial relationship also ended at that time. So it was like this confluence of events of just being really dissatisfied with the structure I built, and then those other two really important aspects. It kind of broke me wide open, I have to say. Not kind of, like it really did break me wide open. And I decided to move to Bali, where I have family, and just undo all the structures that had kept me in place. And by undoing those and also going through menopause, I couldn't get away from shame. Like it was there all the time. And I had skirted it quite a bit, I'd kind of dipped my toes into this concept of not being good enough or being bad or being just simply wrong. But I never dove in. Like I had dipped my toe in and gone, oh yeah, that's there. I got a little bit of energy back, and then I would just go back out and maybe put more of my awareness on frustration or on nervousness or like on more of the superficial stuff. So what I started to notice with the menopause is that, oh, hey, you know what? I'm getting older, and there's nothing I can do to change that.
I've heard it say that anything that's not resolved in the emotional body comes up during menopause, and it's there to be to be looked at and worked through.
Yep. I can attest to that 100%. So one of the questions that I ask in the Shifting Shame workshop for people to kind of marinate on is, what would you be doing if it weren't for shame? If there weren't this relationship that you have with it? And one of the things that I noticed that what was really shame awakening in me was just telling people that I was going through menopause, especially men. And then sitting in front of people and having a hot flash that was, all encompassing, sweat, the works, and seeing the faces that were looking back at me, and just settling into the discomfort. I learned to let go on levels that were like, okay, here's another opportunity. Here's another opportunity. And it was not easy. It was not comfortable. And then I started to notice like how many women that I would work with would come into my bodywork sessions, and they would basically say, you know, they're talented women, like really talented, and somehow they were never good enough.
Yeah.
So by the time when I finally decided, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to go on this journey and just trust that it will take me somewhere. And I went into, like, when I say I needed that trust, because I went into a despair like I've never felt in my life. As I came out the other side, and then I looked back on on the clients and my history of clients, and I thought, oh my God, that's it. That's what needs to be resolved in the body. And if we keep skirting around it, like I felt like it would be a disservice. I couldn't do that anymore. So between that and then just kind of discovering movement in a really new way, because I had been taught a movement technique in the Grinberg method, but then I did embodied flow yoga training, and that opened up movement to me in such a like enriching, fun way. So then when I came back to the original technique that I learned, I was feeling it, I was doing it, and I was teaching it in an entirely different way. And then a friend asked me, like, what are you doing? What, you know, why are you doing what you're doing? She just said, what do you want? And it just came out like I want to teach women about shame. And that's how that workshop was born.
Wow.
Yeah. Been
That's,
rich.
yeah, it sounds incredibly rich and incredibly deep. And I really resonate with that when we go through these big times of transformation ourselves as facilitators. Then there is so much gold. It's like we're being initiated into the deepest parts of ourselves and the collective feminine as well. It's powerful stuff.
It
Yeah.
really is. And you know what's so interesting? You know how people say, like, I'm working on myself and all of that? Like, when I started to dive into shame, I actually stopped having that attitude.
Mm.
I was reaching something that needed to be met. I was touching it.
Mm. And so much of that is so hard to even articulate into words. It's the felt sense. It's where is it in the body, and that's where it needs to be moved from. Yeah.
Because our mind can play around with it, you know, in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
The embodying boundaries actually was kind of an offshoot, because after I had this year-long tour of teaching in different countries, I started to, you know, it's such a big subject, and clearly in a day and a half, I'm just giving a tangible tool of how to approach it. I'm not looking at all the areas where shame can wake up in our lives. You know, not looking at relationships and sexuality and physical body and money, and, you know, that I'm sort of saying, look, you choose an area that you want to really heal up in, and go for it. So one of the biggest things that kept standing out was women's inability to say no. You know, like, and for all the reasons. And so the Embodying Boundaries workshop came out of that. And it's been really, like, I've only taught it now in Melbourne. Melbourne was the first place I taught it. And what became really apparent is that what I'm dealing with in the Embodying Boundaries is how do we as women, what's our relationship to fear, guilt, and anger? So if we can start to recognize that and tap into it in our bodies and do something different with it, our natural response comes out. So it has nothing to do with, you know, being more boundaried. It's the most natural expression of the body. And if you get back to me in a year, I'll probably have a lot more to say about it, because, you know, it's still a relatively new workshop. By the time I get back to Australia, I'll have taught it like 4 or 5 more times, which is always like more, then it becomes more juicy every time. So
Amazing. It was such a powerful, powerful experience being in that workshop and just feeling the difference in where energy, personally, where my energy moved to, and how it shifted in my body, and just the freedom it opened up, and seeing the women in the room just really accessing their no was just incredible.
yeah, yeah. Listening to
Wow.
it, accessing it, and then just allowing it
Mm.
is, I really feel, I think I wrote a blog post about it, and I said, really, like, saying no can be as natural as reaching for a glass of water when we're thirsty. And
Yeah.
I have personally really experienced it, to the point where sometimes, because I'm so in these subjects that I teach, I've surprised myself. Whoa, like, well, look at that. It's come out very, very fluidly and simply.
Because there's so many layers to boundaries, and to the subtleties of all the times that the conditioning that we have around keeping the peace.
Being polite,
Absolutely.
deferring to the other. Yeah, it's really damaging. Really damaging, because in the end, then either we twist inside ourselves and give up on things that we really want because we simply don't have that life force, that energy to go for it, or we damage relationships, because we may become so wound up and then finally explode, and then the person on the receiving end has, up to that point, maybe been participating with a really lovely person who seems agreeable and sweet and nice and all of this, and then boom, and it's a shock, and then the shame that results after that, right?
Yeah.
After we've done something. And so learning how to access the no and then just have it come out through us in such a natural way is, I feel, a really important embodiment training.
Absolutely. And it then, when we're able to do that and other people can receive that, this is wonderful, because other people get the benefits as well. We're inspiring other people to be able to stand in their boundaries as well. It's so important.
Yeah, because, like, if I'm clear about it, then you know where I stand and you know where you stand.
Yeah.
And that is such a deep sign of respect.
Absolutely. Yeah. Beautiful. So you've got a lot coming up for the rest of the year by the sounds of it.
I do.
Where are you going?
Well, there's a couple of workshops. I'm going to see if I can manage to get them on the agenda when I come to Australia in November, because I'm first going to London. I'm sorry, to Copenhagen, and then to London. And this will be my third time in each place. I'm actually starting to congregate in these two centers in Europe. And I'm teaching the shifting shame and embodying boundaries. I'm also teaching tapping into your feminine power, which I have not taught in Melbourne. And quite honestly, I don't know why I didn't put that on the schedule.
Neither do I.
Such a great workshop. I looked at the schedule and I thought, what happened? I missed it. It's a short one. It's 3.5 hours, and it is all about the lower body and tapping into the different qualities that just come from our pelvis, our loins, our womb, our hips, our legs.
I'm getting goosebumps as you say this.
Yeah,
I know how much.
I know I have to figure out and put that on the calendar. So,
but lucky for the people in Europe who are getting to go to that one.
Yeah, and then in both in Europe and in Melbourne, I've got just a class, like a movement class, that's an hour and a half, and it's usually I teach the technique, and then some sort of theme ends up coming out quite naturally from the bodies that are in the room. And so it's usually, a transformative hour and a half, but it's not structured as like the workshops are, with a really specific theme.
Cool.
And yeah, so that's what I have going, and then I come down your way when it's
Beautiful.
warmed back up.
Indeed. So you're going to be here in Melbourne in November. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I head up to Byron, actually to Mullumbimby, and then back and then down to Melbourne, and I'm in town for those workshops and potentially the tapping into your feminine power, and bodywork sessions, which are almost full.
That doesn't surprise me.
Really, really exciting. So yeah, it feels like it's actually coming up pretty quick, you know?
Wonderful, wonderful. So yeah, I would recommend to anybody, do your work, and your workshops fill up pretty quickly, as well as the bodywork sessions. So although November might seem a long time off for those of us here in Australia, get yourselves booked in while you can, because otherwise you'll miss out.
Have, an early bird up through August 13th. So
cool. Wonderful. Awesome. Well, it's so good to talk to you. It's really inspiring, and I love your work. And I just, when we start to educate or allow our bodies to educate ourselves, it's just there's just so much to discover. It's never ending. And the longer I'm on this path, the more my body's initiating me into my own wisdom, and it never ends. Yeah, it's incredible.
You know, and I can say, just on a final note, or one note, when you say that, whenever anybody asks me, like, how do you approach this? How do you approach that? What do I do in this situation? I'm like, just go to the body. Just go to it. You know, just go. And you don't always have to do a movement practice. If you feel like your chest is tight and your jaw is held, and you know that feeling, take a breath or two. Connect to your feet on the ground. Expand your sensual awareness, and something is going to shift. And so it's we know the body has intelligence. It's much more shifting that perspective, like what you said, of where you're going to put your trust.
Yeah. Beautiful. Oh, it's a beautiful place to finish. I feel like I could talk to you all day, but
Thank you so much.
Oh, this has been really rich, really rich.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So thank you, Marcela. And for those of us in Australia, we'll see you in November. And for those in London and Copenhagen, they'll get to see you before we do. And you're also doing work in LA as well at the moment. Is that right?
Embodying Boundaries at the end of this month. And,
awesome.
Right. And sessions throughout, they're a little bit, it's a little bit looser here because I'm here for a longer period of time. So, cool. But I can't wait, man. You guys have pulled me in down there.
Be careful, it's a vortex here.
You speaking it from experience.
Awesome. So thanks very much, Marcela. Thank you for your time.
Bye.